Over the years, many countries have developed their own distinct cinematic styles. America is known for its overproduced, action-packed blockbusters. Japan excels in introspective, poetic films rich with symbolism. Russian cinema often leans towards slow-paced existential dramas. And Uganda has this.
Drop the bomb, man! Tiger Mafia!
At first glance, this might look like something shot by a 90s after-school film club, but in reality this 2010 film is arguably the most famous example of Ugandan cinema. Today, Wakaliwood, a low-budget DIY production from the slums of Wakaliga, is almost synonymous with Ugandan filmmaking. But I couldn't help but wonder, what else does Uganda have to offer in terms of cinema? That's how I set out to find the first Ugandan movie ever made, and my search led me to Feelings Struggle by Ashraf Simwogerere. Virtually impossible to find online, this movie is considered the first Ugandan feature film, and it was shot in 2005. That's 110 years after cinema was invented. So how is it that in the 21st century, when filmmaking is a global medium, there is a country that had virtually no film industry for over a century? To find the answer, I had to turn to Ugandan history. For centuries, the area that is now Uganda was made up of multiple sovereign kingdoms and chiefdoms, often at war with one another. This dynamic began to shift in the 19th century when outside forces, mainly Arab traders and British explorers, arrived, driven by commercial interests in the trade routes along the Nile. Following this scramble for Africa, the British declared Uganda a protectorate in 1894, not a colony like neighboring Kenya, for example. That distinction mattered as it consequently shaped Uganda's cinema, or lack thereof. As a protectorate, Uganda retained a degree of self-governance, but this also meant it was less integrated into the British Empire. Because of this, Uganda did not experience the same level of cultural exchange as colonies like Kenya, Nigeria, or Ghana. Unlike these colonies, where Britain invested in developing arts and cultural institutions, although to serve its own interests, Uganda was seen as a largely agricultural society, which meant Britain saw no interest to invest in Uganda's artistic development. Ugandans' first exposure to film came through silent colonial-era educational reels, shown via mobile cinemas. These films primarily focused on hygiene, improved farming techniques, and cooperative marketing, often reinforcing British rule. In short, these were instructional tools, not cinematic experiences, and they did little to foster local film industry. Ugandan history is unique in the sense that its experience during colonization and the road to independence vastly differs from that of many other African nations. Unlike in most African countries where colonial powers faced significant resistance, the British in Uganda encountered little opposition during the colonization process. Uganda's path to independence in 1962 was unusually smooth as well, a bloodless handover from the British with little of the rebellion or Marxist or Pan-African ideologies that defined other African nations' struggles. However, Uganda's bloodless independence turned out a double-edged sword, peaceful but lacking the revolutionary spark that fuels cinema elsewhere. In Senegal, the anti-colonial fight birthed Ousmane Sembene, the father of African cinema. Niger had Mustafa Alassane, pioneering animation. Uganda? No uprising, no icons, just a quiet cinematic void. However, despite Uganda's relatively peaceful transition to independence, it was not spared from the political turmoil that swept across Africa in the early post-colonial period. Power grabs spiraled into Obote's dictatorship, Amin's coup, and war. For over 20 years, Uganda was engulfed in corruption, poverty, extrajudicial killings, and a complete lack of freedom of expression. This stifled the country's arts and culture, driving many intellectuals into exile. Only in 1986, after Amin was overthrown, Uganda finally began to rebuild, until the HIV epidemic of the 90s hit. The disease swept the continent, with estimates suggesting over 15 million Africans lost their lives by the early 2000s, and Uganda was no exception. With decades of neglect in mass communications, Uganda had little infrastructure for public awareness campaigns. The government needed to reach the masses to stop the spread of the disease, but how? Of course, the absence of a TV industry didn't mean Uganda lacked an art scene. Theatre remained the country's most vital art form, deeply rooted in oral traditions and indigenous performances. It had been central to community life for centuries, preserving history and cultural values. So, logically, the government turned to theatre to spread HIV prevention. But theatre alone wasn't enough. I mean, not everyone had time or access to attend the performances. If only there was some technology, some magical device that would bring this beloved theatre place into every home.
VCL is not only the number one choice, but the only realistic choice.
In the 80s and 90s, Uganda had just one state-owned TV station, and only about 5 to 10% of the population had access to television. For comparison, in the same period, around 98% of Americans had TV. But poverty wasn't the only issue. Ugandan television, the one channel it had, focused mostly on news and politics, giving people little incentive to buy a TV set. With limited options, the government started recording theatre productions on video, using them both to spread HIV awareness and encourage TV ownership.
Do you know the difference between HIV and AIDS?
I know both of them are the same.
A person who has HIV could look like you and me.
While these early productions prioritized messaging over cinematic quality, they played a crucial role in combating the epidemic. By the turn of the millennium, Uganda was considered the most successful country in sub-Saharan Africa in fighting HIV. And in the process, Uganda took its first steps into the world of film and television. And wasn't that something? It looks like something an alien would make after like a 5-minute briefing on the concept of cinema. It's like they have all the right ingredients, the camera, the music, the subtitles, but no real idea how they should come together. Most people I know could film and edit a basic story without any formal film education, and it would still be somewhat watchable. And that got me thinking, why? I realized that it's because we grew up surrounded by movies, absorbing the cinematic language. Even if you don't watch movies, you still encounter this medium every day, in advertisement, in video games, on governmental websites, here on YouTube. And with such a late introduction of film in Uganda, it's no wonder it looks so uncanny. Not only do Ugandan filmmakers often rely on camcorders, analog mics, and VHS tapes on set, but I also was surprised to learn that many still don't use scripts. Instead, they simply give the actors a vague explanation of what's supposed to happen, and the rest is left to improvisation. But just as Ugandan cinema was taking its first baby steps in the early 2000s, it was completely crushed by exports. When you have a $220 million Avengers playing in one cinema and a local $5,000 production in the other, the choice for the average moviegoer is obvious. And the massive skill gap made it even harder for Ugandan industry to grow. So in an attempt to reach larger audiences, many filmmakers resorted to producing cheap imitations of Hollywood blockbusters, abandoning any effort to build a unique Ugandan cinematic identity. And this is where Wakaliwood comes in again. Founded by Isaac Nambwana, this DIY production company took a different approach. Why compete with Hollywood when you can parody it instead? Nambwana began crafting absurd, action-packed Ugandan films that fully embraced their low-budget charm.
If we need a gun, we weld it. Anything like a jib, camera stand, if we don't have one, we make it.
His breakthrough film, Who Killed Captain Alex, exploded online, racking up over 9 million views on YouTube. And while it didn't make him rich, it brought global attention to Ugandan cinema. Nowadays, Nabwana runs the only film school in Uganda, teaching kids from local villages how to make movies. And honestly, that's magical. The idea that kids from the slums, from difficult financial backgrounds, are being given the chance to create, that's what cinema is about. Art doesn't have to be serious to matter. It can be fun, chaotic, and ridiculous, and still be important. Maybe, just maybe, Wakaliwood's over-the-top comedic take on Hollywood blockbusters is the identity of modern Ugandan cinema. Chaotic, but all its own.